Hello, welcome to another episode of the IT Wildcard. So this is a follow-on from the previous episode. It will actually be last week, so I don't always put these out weekly, but I think I'm going to have a bit of a run on these. So I did an episode called What is a Code Smell? I think I'm just going to call this episode I Love Spreadsheets. And what I'd sort of forgotten, when I did the video, I included a link and I referenced this presentation, How to Teach Programming and Other Things. Now, the presentation is by Felienne Hermans. Very interesting individual. Has done really cool research into actually, I'll bring up, I've got a PhD on the screen here. This is the wonderful thing about the web. You can look up the PhD dissertations if they're published. Yeah, she's done a PhD on, let me bring it up actually, analysing, visualising spreadsheets. Only 174 pages. So I'm going to have a look through that actually. There's lots of really interesting stuff in there. But even within this talk, there's lots of other little rabbit holes to go down. She's done some really interesting work in teaching coding from the perspective of like looking at the most effective ways of, structuring code and the way in which you talk about code to facilitate better that communication to a whole wide audience. So that really interests me as being an educator myself. And as I was sort of mulling over this video out on my morning walk, I thought I should really do just a video, just scratch the surface of my own history, I suppose, with spreadsheets. Because when I think about it, spreadsheets are probably one of the most used piece of technology that I've leveraged over the years. I've used them for all sorts of things. I've done training sessions in them where I've taught, quite a wide range of individuals, from complete beginners to fairly advanced users in a multitude of different scenarios. And I think I try and weave some of the training stories in towards the end, because what I was really going to talk about, and as soon as I start talking, I think, I should mention this. But what I was really going to talk about is just my sort of early introductions to spreadsheets, because there was quite a lot of different spreadsheets back in the day. I think now people tend to fall into two camps. You get the people like myself who predominantly use Office 365, so use Excel. And then there's obviously an awful lot of people out there that use Google Docs, Google Sheets, which actually I also use as well. But I would say most of the work that I do in Excel now is Office 365. So I'm going to take a little stop tour through this. I'll post links to all of these in the descriptions that I'm going to go through. As always, I'm just using tabs mainly in Wikipedia to just remind me of sort of what era I'm talking about. And also there's probably going to be a number of videos I'm going to do as part of this IT Wildcard series, which are based on a similar sort of timeline. So I really fancy doing one about computer games that I spent a ridiculous amount of time playing. I'm not that big a gamer, but there are certain games which have probably occupied an unreasonable amount of my time over the years. And then the other thing I wanted to probably talk about is the various different computer platforms that I've had to utilize over the years. Now this will cover a little bit of that second category, the second category, which is computer platforms, but merely because I wanted to talk about a particularly interesting area in my life where I seem to be working on lots of different platforms simultaneously. So we'll get onto that in a moment. So I'll include a link to the Wikipedia article for Spreadsheets. The reason why I brought this up, not only because I'm talking about Spreadsheets, but there's a little bit of history of Spreadsheets in the dissertation, in Felinne's dissertation. And it was talking about, going way back in time. And of course, I'd completely forgotten that, or I tend to forget that, spreadsheets existed in non-electronic formats. This idea of them being spread around certain things. In this case, they're talking about bound ledgers. I've heard stuff being spread around boards, on like whiteboards, on chalkboards, around, say, a very large room, those sort of things. So obviously this idea of paper grids, these bookkeeping ledger columns, influenced, not surprisingly, the format of electronic spreadsheets. And I was trying to think of the first time I used like an electronic spreadsheet. I can think of lots of instances where I've used like a paper grid. And in actual fact, what's interesting is, of course, when I first started coding, I used to write on coding sheets, which are all grids, basically. So I'm going to end up talking about that in a later episode when I get around to talking about computer technology. But when I thought about it this morning, the very first spreadsheet I probably used on a computer where it was a specific application was on this thing. So in 1984, because it was only in production for a year, so sometime between 84 and 85, we had one of these in the house. My dad bought it, or my mum and dad bought it as a present for us. It was one year we had this one present. We wanted this home PC between the three of us, me and my two brothers. And so this was our present for that year. And I can remember going to pick it up from somewhere. My dad gave me the money and I went with one of my brothers and we picked it up from, I can't even remember, well, it was from Tunbridge Wells. That's the place. I can't remember what shop had it. It was probably it must have been at one of the electrical retailers. Somewhere like Dixon's back in the day, or the other one that was very similar to Dixon's. This thing, a +4. And the interesting thing about this was it came with these extra things on it. So it had Commodore Basic on it, and there was a number of software sort of titles it came with on cassette. There was a cassette player that came with it. And if anybody remembers back in the day, the cheapest way you could back up game or back up programs from a computer was using tape, literally cassette tape. And I can remember going to W.H. Smith and buying C15 tapes to do that. Because I used to use, the first computer I did, and I wasn't planning on talking too much, but just for point of reference, was a Commodore PET. So there was no, it was good because I already knew Commodore Basic. And back then, of course, Basic had slightly different variants. There was Commodore Basic, Apple Basic. I suppose there might be also Basic. So it came with a number of games, one of which will feature in the one where I talk about games that I've played to death, was a thing called Icicle Works as well. So yeah, but it did have this inbuilt, it was in it was ROM Resident Application Suite. It's they're rather disparaging here in the reference they make to it. But I think it definitely came with a spreadsheet, and a word processor as well. It's a word processor that is barely that. The database defiles the name, and the spreadsheet has little spread. But there was a spreadsheet nonetheless. So I think that's the first example of, a machine using a spreadsheet on a computer that I can think of. So that will be back 84, 85. Yeah. When did I say? Maybe I've got the date wrong there. Yeah. So yeah, sometime around there. I'm trying to remember how much we paid for it. Was it £100? Something like that. Yeah, so the next sort of stop really was, so I just wanted to talk about 4 computers simultaneously, although when I was doing spreadsheets after this, there was one in particular which I did all my spreadsheet work on. So when I went to work and I was working in a lab, which was attached to a laboratory, there were a number of computers at that point. So the production lab, which I used to work in, but then I moved over to quality control. But the production lab ended up buying an IBM PC. So this would have been, I started work there in 81. So this was definitely after then. Then I'm just trying to think how long I worked in the lab. It was probably a couple of years. So I reckon 82, 83, they got an IBM PC, and the manager there computerized a lot of the weighing sheets for weighing antibiotics and scanning in barcodes, and it was integrated into the weighing machine to record the weights of the antimicrobics that were being prepared. So that was the first computer I came across at a workplace. They also had some Apple IIs there, which we had in the labs initially to interface with fluorescent readers for automated bacterial susceptibility testing using fluorescent. They were not enzymes, fluorescent substrates, both in terms of antimicrobial susceptibility and antimicrobial identification. Later they used DEX for that, and when there was a software team in-house, I wasn't involved with them directly, that coded up on the Apples and the DEX, and that was because they were the go-to machines that our users ran the diagnostic software on. And those were users mainly in the States. We did sell to the UK. But the first time I used a spreadsheet at work would have been on an Amstrad 1512 or 1640. I think it was 1640s. We initially, there was a 1512 that somebody had. I think my boss of my boss, the quality assurance manager, had a 1512 which he used to use, and his assistant used to use for word processing, for drawing up quality control and production documents. And we must have acquired those for the labs, so we bought some 1640s, and that's the size of the memory, 640 and 512, and that would be K. kilobytes of RAM. It's funny when you think about it now. And we had these hard drives. I wasn't intending on this turning into a hardware talk, but it's talking about that. But I'll go back over this when I do my proper episode about computer hardware. Yeah, so pretty lean. We had a hard card in the back, but getting back on track, I'm pretty sure we were using Lotus 123, and this would have been around about, it must have been 88, 89, somewhere around that time period. Lotus 123, but it made me minded of another one that was floating around. I don't know anybody of an age who watches this channel that remembers the first time they used Lotus 123 back when it came out. So around that, around the 80s. But if you remember, there was this other product, a shareware version called As Easy As. So it was, As Easy As 123. So it referenced the dominant spreadsheet at the time, which was Lotus 123. And so there were definitely copies of this kicking around, I remember. Used cell formulas very similar. I don't know if people remember from back in the day where you had the at function syntax as opposed to the equals. So everything was at and then the function rather than equals. So, but it was of course using letter number addressing schemes as well. Discontinued end of development 2004. Wow. Yeah, won quite a few awards. But anybody also that used to buy computer magazines where they had discs on them, this would be the sort of shareware that would end up on those discs. Now, when the first machine I owned myself, the first PC I bought myself, was one of these. Must have been I'm pretty sure they made a 386SX. It was certainly the 2000 series, but I can't remember if this was particularly the code number for it, but I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah, it was this base, and because it had 4 mega RAM. Got it around, I would say, when was I working at Radio Rentals? So yeah, it would have been 94, sometime around 94. I don't know when they stopped making these, but it was around that period. I'm pretty sure it was this model. But once I got that, and started playing around on that, obviously As Easy As was still kicking around, and I started to experiment with other spreadsheets, install other things. So at that point, I was mainly using spreadsheets that were on cover disks, so it would have been things like As Easy As. Also in 86, I can remember watching this. So yeah, on Channel 4, Try It for the Nerds. If you can track this down on YouTube, it's a fascinating thing to watch. Really cool. I learned so much from this about the history of computing, and learnt about VisiCalc, which I'll come on to in a moment. Also, this is how I learnt about Magic the Gathering. It gets mentioned in there. But a whole slew of other things, object-oriented programming they mentioned, which I was starting to study, because around this time in 95, I think I'd already started Open University. So, I was like, oh yeah, I know about object-oriented programming. And they were talking about a lot of things like Windows and GUIs, and obviously at this point Windows 95 was out, Windows 3.11 been out for quite a while. So sometime in 98, I went over working for myself, doing troubleshooting and training. So I started having to write up training materials, and most of the stuff I was coming across, I was trying to think, like, once I got my home computer, what was the first spreadsheet I used? And it was probably SuperCalc. By, at that point, Computer Associates owned Sourcim. And I had this copy, which was on a disc, funnily enough, for free, of SuperCalc. I think it was called 3D. So it was like a multi-tab spreadsheet. Yeah, so SuperCalc 3D, or whatever they called it. So I remember using that initially, dabbling with that. I was trying to think if I was using any spreadsheets at Radio Rentals. Yeah, we were actually. Yes, we were. Because we were using it for doing our calculations of loan agreements. Yeah, wow. But I just can't remember what I was using, because we weren't using Windows, we were using DOS. So it must have been either Lotus, SuperCalc, or something I'll come on to in a moment. Also, I remember as I sort of moved from working at Radio Rentals to working for myself, coming across clients that were using Quattro Pro, because what had happened was, so this came out in 88, which was definitely when I started working for myself and teaching. I was also teaching at Red Hill College. Over there, I was predominantly using Microsoft Excel here. So what was happening is, around, me going from having my home PC in around about 95, 94, 95, to working for myself and teaching and everything that involved around about like 98. I was slowly moving through various spreadsheet programs, just gaining experience in them. So as I've said, SuperCalc, Quattro. Another one was Microsoft Works, because that came with a spreadsheet in it. There was also another program whose name escapes me, which I actually had on the Amstrad, which was probably, now I think about it, the first spreadsheet that I used on that particular model, when I think about it. And it was something with Works in the title. It wasn't Microsoft Works. It was another, like a similar to, like, looked like this. It wasn't Apple Works, but it was another word glued together, concatenated, if that's the correct term, with Works. But it's gone, and I don't have the book. It came with this really cool manual, actually. I predominantly on that used the word processor, actually. But and it was very so. It was a Works knockoff. It was a monolithic program architecture. It had a word processor, a spreadsheet. The database was really a sort of, I don't know, like almost like index cards. But I remember that. But I was also coming across Works, because that was often the program. If you bought a new machine, they'd give away. They'd often have Works, and they'd sometimes bundle in Word to upgrade it a bit. And then, sometime after 98 or thereabouts, I really started to use Excel a lot. And I'm pretty sure, I was trying to think, it was around this version, Excel 95, 97. There were sort of older copies of these kicking around in the 2000s, which you could sort of pick up like OEM copies at computer fairs and things like that. But yeah, I went through, I think actually a client gave me a copy of Excel 97 because they didn't need it, which they'd had bundled up. And at college, where I was teaching, which would have been in, I don't know, 98, 99 when I first started there. Once I got into doing more work for them in terms of doing bespoke courses, and some of the course structure changed on the business. So I was teaching for the business school, doing information management. And as the programs changed, because of what was dictated by the institute or whoever we were doing the course on behalf of. So I was teaching a course of what was it now, the CMS, so Certificate in Management Studies and Diploma in Management Studies. As the organisation that ran that oversaw those, that would audit us, were changing their curriculum, obviously we'd need to change what we taught. But I also got involved with designing bespoke courses because I convinced the college that we should use their IT suite, which was it wasn't overutilised back then. So we used to get external clients in who'd pay to have training in office suites. So I'd do all the training for that. And that was a sort of a side gig on my side gig, I suppose. Yeah. Plus they had a whole department, which initially I wasn't involved with, which was like over in the business school over there had its own little unit. And then over in the main tower block at East Surrey College, I don't know if anybody listening to this knows East Surrey College, but there's a tower block, and in that big tower block there was the computing department. And I did ultimately end up doing work for them, and that's probably some lessons involving teaching students in Microsoft Word and Office products, but most of the work I did was over in the business department. Yeah, in terms of like year on year. And so, yeah, I remember like working my way through these different versions of Excel. The first job, and I'd say, well, not the first job, but when I came over to Canada and went back to working for a firm, I think it was Office 2007. Then we moved on to 2013, so we skipped over 2010. Like a lot of firms, a firm won't often, go over to the next version straight away. A lot of firms sort of skip over. So what you tend to find is by the time this comes out, this has starting to go beyond its support cycle quite considerably. So they sort of do these big jumps of a couple of years. I think just when I left, if I'm remembering this rightly, I think we were going over, Office 365, that's it. And I'd already started to use Office 365. I had access to Office at Home as well, and I'm pretty sure I must have bought a copy of Office 20. Did I buy a copy of Office 2010? Probably. Yeah, I think I might have done. I know we had a copy in the house, and it wasn't, acquired from work. I definitely have my own copy of Office. But yeah, now we just have a Office 365 license, which is cool. So we just use that at home. Yeah. And so that's where I'm now. That's the most recent version I'm using. The reason why I've got VisiCalc in here is an interesting thing happened. So I didn't actually get used to use VisiCalc until, I suppose, on this timeline, sometime around here. Yeah. So it was after it was mentioned in Triumph for the Nerds. Probably before I was using later versions of Microsoft. That's why I've positioned it here. So I actually started to use it after I started using some of the earlier versions of Microsoft. And that was because as we started to teach more about underlying business packages in the management information and the information management courses I was teaching on, and in some of the project management stuff, we got a bit more hands-on with spreadsheets and stuff like that. I did a little bit about the history of spreadsheets, I remember. So I actually pulled up, you could even back then, so that would have been, like I said, the 2000s, you could pull up a version of VisiCalc online, just download it. Yeah. There's a really interesting story behind how this was created. I think it's right, they never received any money. The inventors, just because of the way it was done at the time. So they've never really received any royalties off the back of everything else. I think that's right. And this is a really interesting story. I'm not going to go into here. You can read this. It comes up on Triumph for the Nerds. But it's all to do with like where they first got inspired about, creating a visual calculator from a presentation at Harvard Business School. Yeah, wow. I talk about it because it was the killer app for Apple IIs. And that again, they explain that in that Triumph for the Nerds. So basically, I would recommend watching Triumph for the Nerds if you've never seen it. If you're interested in the history of the personal computer and other things connected to that, then definitely check it out on YouTube. And I'll include a link to it if I manage to track it down myself fairly easy after doing this video. So yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed this. It's brought a smile to my face just reminding myself about all of this in real time, and just it sort of takes me back actually to all the times I've stumbled across various spreadsheets, and so thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will definitely catch you in a future video.